Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my Metabolic Life podcast channel. Thanks for joining me, and I'm super fired up to introduce Laura Russell to you. I've gotten to know Laura over the last month, and I have to tell you, I am so incredibly impressed with her knowledge level. She's been at this a lot longer than me, but I know I put a lot of time into this, and every single time I brought up something or we went down a rabbit hole as we've spent hours now talking with each other. I'm just astounded at her knowledge on everything that I pay attention to. So she's an expert. She's got some great stories. She's got both her personal and client stories you're going to hear about. And so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to say, Laura, welcome to the channel. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you? And you know where we're going to go, and let's do it.
Sure. So I'm Laura Russell. I am a nurse. I've been a nurse for just over 22 years now. What I'm doing currently is I am home health nursing, which I absolutely love because you're autonomous and your nutrition education you give your patients is whatever you want it to be. So that opens up for me to be able to be ketogenic with my clientele, which I'd say probably 99% need that. Um, the other thing I do is I have a website. I make natural products. So this morning I was up making tooth powder. I make all these natural things. I make stuff out of tallow. So I don't have a lot of free time because I also crochet blankets for my patients
Wow.
and give them
I know
blankets
how
before
time
I get them
consuming that
discharged.
is. I
Yeah,
understand that.
yeah. So I do that, but you know, part of the reason I think that I woke up to the bad food environment that we had was my upbringing. I was raised next door to my grandmother who came through Auschwitz, came over, and she had always instilled in me honesty, integrity, all the things that you're supposed to have, I thought. And she just had a mistrust of big government because of where she had came through. So she
Okay.
always told me that it's not the government's job to take care of you, and any government that wants to take care of all of your needs has an ulterior motive. So my whole life, that has been in the back of my head, and I just paid attention, I think, more than probably the average little kid did, because I had her wisdom that she gave me. So I utilized that, and very early on, you know, growing up, my mother ate what we would call healthy. She didn't do a lot of the processed foods. She made our bread, she made stuff like that. And I was heavy, but when I moved out at 17, you get to eat whatever you want when you're your own boss. So by the time I was 19 and a half, almost 20, I was 313 pounds. Um, yeah, borderline diabetic. Um, Hypertensive. I had anxiety, depression, horror. I had no acne at that time. I ended up getting that later, but I had these weird, almost look like age spots. Um, and I think that was liver related. You see people and they call them liver spots. I think that's kind of what it was. So I'm sure I had fatty liver. They didn't test for anything like that back then. And even like hemoglobin A1C wasn't something they did. So this was in 1991 that I went to see my doctor. And he, of course, wanted to put me on a statin. Those were brand new in 1987. So 91, they're still pretty new. And he wrote me a paper script and, patted me on the head and sent me on my way. And I just said, I'm not going to live out of a bottle. I remember asking him, how long do I have to take these? Because, I was 20, I wasn't a nurse. And I'm like thinking like an antibiotic, like, oh, 7 days, you're good. And he said, well, the rest of your life. And I said, I'm not living out of a bottle. So that mixed with my personality really kind of changed the trajectory of my life. I went to our library. We had a really old castle looking library in my little town. And I spent weeks because this is before computers and Google and all that stuff. And I went through old medical journals. I also went through a couple that were like veterinarian medicine. And every one of them talked about, the process, hyper processed foods, process this. the seed oils, the da da da. I mean, it's like what you hear us talk about now. It was already there. It was there to begin with, and it was like somewhere around 1910, everything in the medical system went to hell in a handbasket, which now we know is, the Carnegie family and, Kellogg's and all those people getting in bed together,
Yep.
big petroleum, big farm, and
Of course.
they overran the schools, and that's when the guidelines. Another big shift happened in the last 15 years. It used to be you went to the doctor and, they talk about a cure, like we can do this, we can do that, and we're going to try to cure you. You don't hear that come out of their mouth. And now when they send you home with paperwork, it'll say on the top of it, disease management. And I'm like, that's like saying you got a slow oil leak in your car. And instead of, putting a better drain plug in it, or fixing the valve cover gasket, whatever the issue is, just keep pouring oil in it. It's fine that it's, going through it. So it just didn't make sense to me. So after about 3 weeks of studying this, just looking at natural, I think that was the big key. It was like in evolution being this big, we ate, you know, occasional berries, occasional root stuff that we could find, animals. Then the last 150 years, it was, the industrial revolution, and it was bigger farms, and it was, processed everything. And that's really when you see these crazy disease numbers just explode. So I knew that, and it made sense to me. So I went home, and I feel horrible about this, but I cleaned out my pantry. Anything white, anything boxed, anything that said carbohydrates on the back of it, I bagged it up and I took it down to the food pantry. Now, if I had it to do all over again, it'd go in the burning bin. Yeah, I just wouldn't even do it. But I did that, and in 9 months, I lost 153 pounds, and that was no exercise because I was deconditioned. I could not get from the front of my house, thank you, to my mailbox. So I went back to see him, had my blood work done again. And the first time they had drawn my blood, they turned the tube on the side to have you read your name. And it had little white chunks in it, looked like Crisco pieces. And I remember asking the nurse that time, I said, "What is that?" And she goes, "Oh, it's fat, like no big deal." And I was like, "Oh, shoot." And I hadn't been eating any butter, any fat off of an animal, only meat I was eating with the doctor's advice that I had from 17 to almost 20 was chicken breast, no skin, no fat. It was your sugar-free salad dressings, which are nothing but seed oil, and your low-fat stuff. So I was taking none of that in, but getting sicker. And so when I went back to see him, of course, I walk in, he was like, "Oh, congratulations," and then slapping himself on the back because, his wonderful drug had saved my life and bought him a new boat probably by that point. And I said, "Oh," I said, "Doctor," well, I almost said his name, I don't like to say it, but I said, "I didn't take your medicine, I didn't fill the script," and I handed it back to him because that was the old paper script days. And he looked at me and I said, "I fixed me by what I put in my body." And it's a one floor hospital at the time. And I said, and he just looked at me like I had two heads. And I said, "Well, you are what you eat." And I said, "I'm a gearhead." I said, "You see my Camaro sitting out there? It's a 77 Camaro with a 327 out of a 68 Corvette. I rebuilt it. What do you think I put in that? Do you think I put in low octane fuel, or you think I run jet fuel?" And he goes, "I don't know." And I said, "Turbo blue. That's jet fuel. If you put the best fuel in, you're going to get the most benefit out of it." And I said, "Everything we eat, drink, smoke, inhale, anything we're around, the products we put on our skin, all of that has to be broke down by our body." And he goes, "Well, if you're not going to take this medicine, you're just going to die a fat ass." And I go, "Okay." I said, "Well, I disagree with you." I said, "Shame on you. You're a physician. You should know how my body works better than I do. I had to go out and do this studying myself to figure out, what's the right stuff to put in the body." And I said, "So I'm going to lose a lot of weight." And he's like, "Well, you're small enough." And I said, "No, And I don't remember what I thought he weighed at the time, but I said, "That's the weight I'm losing because you're fired." And I fired him that day, um, which was glorious. I felt really good at first, and then I got home and I was like, "I'm an asthmatic. What if I get sick and I need a doctor?" And then well, I wonder how bad your asthma is really gonna be now that you've cleaned this up. And I used to go, and I didn't even realize this, um, I didn't really pay attention to it because once you've been doing it for so long, you're like, "Oh, I forgot about that." But I used to use an, albuterol inhaler, a Ventolin inhaler weekly, the whole thing, which is it's supposed to be a month's supply. I haven't used a Ventolin inhaler in probably 12, 15 years. So I know that that has definitely improved. So I think the biggest thing that I think that it affected me, other than just being able to learn to be more in tune with my own body, was getting rid of depression and anxiety, and that really cleaned up the best when I actually went carnivore. So I went what they call keto in 1991, which nobody was talking keto. I think Stillman's diet was out there maybe, and I can't remember. My mom had talked about another Atkins, I think. I didn't read any of that stuff. I hate to read unless it's something I really, really want to read. And so I didn't really want to read that stuff. I just knew just to listen to my own body as to what I wanted to eat. So it was very meat heavy, fat heavy, and just the vegetables that we grow is what I did for my keto for 26 years. And then the big products came out that were keto bars and keto this and the Quest bars and all these that were supposedly healthy versions. And for once an addict, always an addict, those sweet things just came back, and it was like, I have to get to the store and get another one of those Quest bars. That tasted like Oreos or there was different ones, and I sat back and I was like, "Holy crap, what is in that?" I had never even turned it over and looked at the back of it, and as soon as I did, I was like, "Holy shit," the first ingredient was maltodextrin. Was. Had I turned that over and looked at it the very first time, I would have never touched it. And so the last 2 years of keto, I was pretty well derailed. I didn't cheat where I say I went and ate bread or I ate any kind of sugar, but it was all these junky products and trying to mimic, like make the cheesecake that looks like the cheesecake you used to eat, making different things with these fake ingredients and these sugar alcohols and stuff. And I developed really bad cystic acne right around here, which is hormonal. I was getting closer to menopause, and it was so bad. The amount, and I'm not a makeup, I don't care about makeup, but I had to go buy liquid concealer type makeup just to kind of get those to where I didn't look scary, I thought. And the depression and anxiety was off the charts. And so I'm so glad I went carnivore when I did because I did it in 19 in June. And that, of course, was before all the crazy stuff that we went through. And I'm so glad that I was carnivore when I went through all of that because as much pressure as I had at my employer, I would have up to 45 emails a day threatening me of losing my job, of getting walked out, all the things, what I was going to do, da da da, that I could hardly focus on taking care of patients, which is what my job was. And I'm like, I would think you'd want me to take care of patients and you wouldn't want me being bombarded constantly with this. But I was able to compartmentalize that very well and be like, I'll deal with you guys later. Right now, this is what I'm doing. And so I was able to do that. And so I think that was definitely helpful. I gained 10 pounds the first few weeks that I was on carnivore from going keto of 28 years into carnivore. I gained 10 pounds and I don't really get on the scale very often. I have one of those Renfro scales and they're fine, but I don't care. I really don't care about that. I'm weird. I'm one of those girls that I don't care. But I had checked and I was like, crap, I put 10 pounds on and my scrubs, were they were a little tighter. And I thought, I am cheap. I am not buying new scrubs. So I got to get this figured out. And so I watch a lot of Dr. Eric Berg, a lot of Baker, a lot of Barry, Dr. Barry, and, I just was like, "Okay." I Dr. Berry was like, "You gotta stay the course, you're healing, the body is healing, and in a state of healing, you will have sometimes some weight gain because the cholesterol needs to raise to heal, you need to get rid of these impurities, you have oxalates dumping, when fat you are putting on muscle without even trying is the crazy thing, yes, when you go carnivore."
And
And so I was like, "All
bone
right."
density.
Yeah, yeah, and so I was like, and I am not a trust the process kinda gal. My personality is like, fight, make it happen, go out there, I'm the one that's if they say, "You can't do this," I'm like, "Oh, okay," and then I'm like, "Here I go, and I'm gonna do it." So, but that one, I just was like, "Okay." There's 2 times in my life I have really listened to my inner voice or God, if you wanna call it, and it was that time, it was like, just follow the process. The other time was over the things that they wanted us to take. They were on us so hard up to like September. And I came home and I was like, okay, and I'm sitting on the couch and I'm trying to crochet and I'm so mad because I'm like, why are they being like this so hard, on people? And I just said, all right, God, I said, if I'm supposed to do this and you are okay with me putting that in my body, you're going to have to say so. And I'm not kidding you. And my husband has hearing loss and he's in the kitchen, completely a wall between us and an open doorway. And I heard, I made you whole, which gives me goosebumps every time. And I mean loud. And my husband come around the corner. He goes, who was that? And I go, well, I think that might have been God. And I said, "But I'm gonna listen to that," and from that point on and I have no conjecture. If somebody wants to do that, I'm 100% open to anybody doing what they wanna do. I just was against the you as an employer, a government can force me. That's where my dog in the fight was. If you want it, I was like, "That's okay. I'll tell you where you can go pick it up and get it or, go get stuff done." I just wasn't gonna do it for myself because I knew my immune system was very good. And I had worked in the COVID unit and hadn't gotten it. So I was just like, why would I? Why am I gonna do this? So at that point, I knew it would take a bullet and it'd be too late anyway before I would ever do something like that. So that's the 2 times in my life where I was like, okay, I'm gonna listen. I'll just sit here and do it. So with the 10-pound weight gain that I had, I didn't even pay attention weight-wise, 'cause I really that's the first scale I've owned in probably 35 years or so, but I went to get my uniforms out. I had been on vacation for a week. We'd went to Kentucky, and I came back with a cave crud. I'm not sure what was in that cave, but it was something. Because boy, I was sick as the dog. But I came back and I was getting my uniform out for the next day because 'cause I'm a prepper planner, so I get it out, and I pulled it up, and I was like, "I'm gonna try these on. These look like I've got, like, a bigger size than what I thought I had hanging up in the closet," and it wasn't. It was my larges, and I pulled them on, and I was like, "Oh, I've gotta go pull out my mediums now." I had lost the 10 pounds, and it was no change except I was actually eating more fat. So for myself, I found my sleep improved, my energy improved, my depression, anxiety improved when I increased the fat. And I'm talking 80% fat. I probably eat 80% fat, 20% protein. I did 50-50 for a long time. And then I just kept inching it up until I felt like I felt my best and had the best sleep. I mean, I can go to bed and I don't require a lot of sleep, but as long as I get straight through sleep, it can be 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7. I don't ever sleep that I know of past 7 hours because my brain's like, "You're wasting time. You need to get up and go do something and stay busy." And, but that's when I was like, "Okay." I was like, "I'm just somebody that needs more fat." Now, on my website, I also work with clients. It's called Speak with a Nurse, and, the people I have worked with client-wise, I have also found that it seems like the females do better when they have higher amounts of fat, at least the first year. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the hormones. A lot of the people I'm working with are in their 40s and up. I have a lady that's 83, and she's awesome. She's so cool. But we have been low fat for so long. We've been eating this junk, and I mean, we've wrecked our hormones, because your hormones are made up of the cholesterol. That's a building block of that. It's kind of like saying you can build muscle with not eating any kind of protein. Got to have amino acids in there, you know. So I find that they have to have that, and that is probably the biggest hurdle I have working with clients through my website is like, you got to eat more fat, and they're like, I am, and I'm like, I know, but we got to not think 1990s fat, like real fat, more fat, because so many of them went through that 80s, 90s, and 2000, where it was like, if it came from something that had a hoof, you're horrible for having it. And it's just so hard to get that out of their head. So that's what I've seen the majority of. My first client was actually a man. He's done extremely well. He had his mother's dialysis. He was well on his way to dialysis, very close. And so, working with him, he didn't need a whole lot. I think he wanted somebody just to bounce stuff off and see if he was going down the right track. He really was already doing a lot of the stuff. I think we tweaked a few little things just to help him, and he's done, fabulous. I think he's over 85 pounds down. But my most favorite
Hold on. I just want to,
story.
can I just have you elaborate? Do you say he was like moving towards dialysis or he was on
Yeah,
dialysis?
his mother was dialysis, and I think he was stage 4. Stage 5 is when they start giving you an AV
Right. Yeah.
fistula. Yep, right, and you're going and, of course, diabetic. She was diabetic, he was diabetic. I mean, he had every metabolic thing coming. He didn't have cancer, so that's good. But my favorite patient of all is actually one with my nursing career for home health. I had a diabetic that we got a call, needed to go out and do wound care for him. He had had a brand new stump. So they had taken off right below his knee about 3 inches and had made a stump. And so he had a staple line, where they had closed the skin up from doing his amputation from his diabetes. And the first day I walk in, and I had known his wife. She was a licensed practical nurse, and I had ran into her several times. And so I was talking with her a little bit, and he's sitting there, and I don't know if you've ever been around somebody that looks really puffy and just diabetic, just very diabetic. And they have that yeasty smell, not dirty, but kind of like somebody just cooked dinner rolls that are yeasty. That is kind of that ketone breath stuff that they have. He kind of had that. And then I was like, okay, because at first I was like, don't get on your soapbox. But I'm like, I don't want to see this guy lose more of his leg or his other leg, because he actually was a truck driver, like semi truck driver. And so I said, okay, in the state of Illinois, as great as it is, um, if you have an amputation below the knee and you have a prosthetic, you can drive truck, because you just need the knee joint to be able to, to utilize the pedals. And I said, but if they have to go up above the knee and do an amputation, you can't get a CDL.
Yep.
And I think that's probably nationwide, but I know for sure that I saw the Illinois rules the way they read that way. And I said, I think I can help you if you're willing to, if you hit your rock bottom, which for most of us, I would think, yeah, that's your rock bottom. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah. And I thought, he hasn't hit rock bottom. So he had a CGM on his arm. This was about 11 o'clock in the morning. And he taps his phone to it. He has that kind. And it was like 414. And he was like, that ain't bad. And I was like, whoa. I'm like, yeah. I
Oh,
said, what did you have for breakfast? And he goes, oh, I haven't eaten anything. I said, wait, that is fasted? Like, it was like a 16 hours since he had had anything to eat, and he was over 400. And I go, and I'm sitting on a little teeny stool, like right in front of his chair. And I'm just like, dude, I know the surgeon who did your surgery. I can promise you, if this doesn't heal and gets infected, he's not going to play around. He's going to just go ahead and go another 12 inches up and be done with it and take off the rest of the leg. You're going to have very little because that's how surgeons are. They don't like to see you mess up their work, you know. And I said, I'm telling you, I know this guy. He's going to be like, and he's like, okay. So as I'm doing his dressing change, I'm talking to him and his wife about some little changes they can make. And she was like, "Well, I can make our bread." And she had corn flour, which is better than the other junk, and some stuff. So they started doing that. And he got a little bit better. I think his fasting was like in the low 300s. Um, but
Still,
his hemoglobin, oh, yeah, his hemoglobin A1C was 10.9 the day I walked in. I know. And it had probably been much higher than that. He was on two insulins and metformin, Jardiance, and Januvia, so 3 pills. I had to think if he was on 3. He was on 3 of those and 2 of the, insulin. So, I could tell that I could smell the bread, I'd see it on the stove when I come in, so I knew they were doing that, but they still had, like, the Honey Nut Cheerios and, the Twinkies sitting around, and I thought, "Okay." So, kinda listening, but kinda not, you know? So, it was about 3 weeks into it, and I was pressing around on that suture, where the staples were, and he had an area that was kind of dusky, purpley looking, not skin tone, and it was boggy. So it felt like a sponge when you pushed in, and I was like, "Mm." He goes, "What?" And I said, "You gotta go back to the doctor." I said, "He's gonna have to open this up and cut a little bit more out, do an incision debridement," is what that's called when they take that. I said, "'Cause you've got dead tissue underneath there, and it's gonna become an abscess if we don't deal with it now." And so I sent him back down. That next day, he went and saw the surgeon, and I'm at the office, and I get a call on my cell phone, not the work phone, and it was his wife, and she's like, "They're gonna take his leg off today." And I'm like, "Well, they're not gonna take it off today because 'cause he's got an infection, but they're gonna put him on antibiotics, and that's the plan." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I know, doctor. I know that's the way he runs." And she goes, "Well, will you just talk to him and give us a chance?" And I said, "Is he going to be willing to do some of these changes?" And I said, "It's okay." I said, "I can't make anybody do it. I just don't I just want to give you the knowledge, and I know that you can do it because 'cause I'd seen her, she had lost probably 100 pounds 10 years ago by just lowering her carbohydrates. So I knew she knew, but it was like he goes, "I'm a trucker, that's what we do." And I'm like, "But you don't have to." I know you're driving, and he didn't do long distance trucking. His was more like grain trucks and stuff, more local. But they do. They just pull into those little restaurants on the side of the road, and it's, mashed potatoes and gravy and hot roast beef sandwiches, which taste great, but they're not good fuel. They're not good for the body, and especially if you're diabetic,
the
you
roast
know.
beef, just not everything else that came with it.
Yeah, yeah. And so she said, "Yes." So I said, "All right, put him on the phone." I had worked with him because I was cardiac nurse, and he, of course, vascular surgery is what this guy's specialty was. And so I got him on the phone and I called him by his first name because he's a hunter and we had always discussed hunting. So we had a first name basis. And I just said, "Hey," I said, "It's Iceberg was my nickname because my old last name was Berg." And he's like, "Oh, yeah." He was like, "Oh," he goes, "This is your guy?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, you ain't fixed him." And I said, "Can you give me 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Let's see if we can get those blood sugars more like 100, 110. I'd even be 150, I'd be happy with." He says, "You got 2 weeks." I said, "Okay." And, so he said, "I'm gonna change I had to do wound vac." So you know what a wound vac is. So, you put this device on, you gotta tape it certain way, and you change it every other day. And so we had to start doing that in the home because they didn't wanna close it back up because of the infection. So I go in the next morning to get that started, and he goes, "I ate at Culver's yesterday." Well, I've never eaten at a Culver's. I didn't even know what that was, but it's like an ice cream burger type place or something. And when they left the doctor's office, and I said, "Okay." And he goes, "I considered it my last bad meal." And I said, "Okay. I understand that." It's like, I got it out of my system. Now we're going to hit this full on. And so I just was like, I already had recipes that were keto because I felt like he would be fine with keto, ketovore. And so I had tons of those recipes that I had written up for the cath lab and open heart patients and grocery list already printed out, everything already done. So we just kind of went through that. And within 2 weeks, his blood sugar was down to 104 consistently.
Wow.
Almost every time he would do that, it was 104. Yeah, so I felt like that was great. The wound started healing very, very well. It takes longer for their wounds to heal than you or I that aren't diabetic, even with a wound back. But I think we were 6 weeks in. He went down to see his diabetic doctor because, you get all these specialties so that they can charge the bigger money to Medicare. And this guy was 70, I think he was 74. So he had been diabetic over 20 years already at this point when I first started seeing him. So he went down, they did his hemoglobin A1C, and he was 6.7.
From
And
from 10.
yeah, from 10.9. And so on his piece, his lab worksheet, the nurse had written a happy face and like, good for you. The doctor came in his room with his wife sitting there and was like, he goes, "What do you think, doc? That's pretty good." And he goes, "Well, I like to keep my diabetics around 7 to 8." Yeah. And his wife goes, "Well, I was a nurse. And when I worked in the nursing homes," she says, "we always wanted to shoot for like 5.5, 5.6 and under." And he's like, "Well," he goes, "that was back then." He goes, "Now we kind of know better. We know to keep you around 7 or 8." And she says, "I feel like he's doing damage to his body at those higher numbers." And he goes, "That's what we got the medicine for." And so they left, and I saw him the next day because it's every other day for this wound vac dressing. And he tells me this, and I was appalled. I was like, how dare, the oath to do no harm. How is that not breaching the oath to do no harm when you are telling people that a hemoglobin A1C of 7 and 8 that's great. And I said, "Well, you do understand the reason he said that." And his wife goes, "No." And I said, "Because once he gets down and he stays down to that, below a 5.6 for 3 months, he can request to have diabetes removed from his diagnosis." And I said, "Once that happens, you can't go to the diabetic specialist and he doesn't get that $900 for every visit he sees you, whether it's 2 minutes or 30 minutes." And I said, "So it's cutting into him?" And she said, "Oh." And she goes, "But shouldn't that be what he wants is for us to get healthier and for him to not lose any." I said, "Well, I would think so. And I wish it was that way, but it doesn't appear to be that way." So we just stayed the course, got his leg healed up about another 3 weeks, which I felt like was pretty good for a diabetic. Got him healed up and, got out of the house. He graduated, and it was probably 2 months after that, that I was walking, from the health department I work at to the post office, and here comes this grain truck and honks at me, and he flips me off out the window, which is in the Midwest, that's a, "Hey, you're pretty okay."
From there too.
Yeah, and so then I was like, "Oh," and it was my patient, it was him, and so he had gotten his prosthetic, he was driving again, he was just happy, even though he was, 74. I mean, he'll probably drive until they tell him he absolutely can't to, he's a very good driver, but I just was like, "That's what it's supposed to be about." His doctor called my office because I had 2 of his patients, not from him, like, they were sent to us by their primary doc, but they also happened to have this guy, and he says, "Are you Laura?" And I said, "I am." And he goes, "What do you think you're doing?" I said, "What do you mean?" "I can play stupid all day long." And, he goes, "Well," he goes, "such and such," he goes, I can't even see him right now." I said, "Well, yeah, I hope you don't ever get to be able to see him again." And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, I said, "Medicare pays you $900 for a specialty visit, regardless of the time slot that you're filling." And I said, "Why wouldn't you work to try to get this guy not diabetic and the other guy not diabetic who's losing his eyesight? If you can prevent that, why wouldn't you? Because I said, I thought doctors took an oath to do no harm. And I said, I guess maybe you took the Hippocratic oath. And he said, yeah, he wasn't happy with that. And he did know what I meant by it. So I know my boss was sitting across from me and she was like, and I was like, and I just said to him, I said, you don't have to worry. I'm not out to shut down your business. But I said, I'm going to try to fix every person that's willing to make these changes so that they can improve. Because don't worry about it, dude. I'm like, look at all these kids walking around with fatty liver disease. You got it made. You're going to have plenty of help. You're going to be making a lot of money. But any of my people that I'm taking care of, just know I will be working this way to make sure. And then he asked me, um, I think he said something to the effect if I could go after your license. I said, go for it. I said, my scope of practice, I can tell you word for word what it says. And he says, well, you're doing diabetic education. I said, no, I'm doing nutrition. My license says I can educate on nutrition. Well, you need to follow the ADA. I said, my scope of practice says teach nutrition. And I think that was about the end of the conversation, but I was like, and then I knew that the other patient, when I talked to him, he said, "Oh, he doesn't like you." I was like, "Good. Then I'm doing something right."
Can
You
I
know?
jump in? Can I jump in here for a quick second?
Yeah,
And so on my website, and I'm sure you probably also heard now that there's a new to compete with the ADA, because exactly what you were just talking about
yes.
there, the ADA is just another captured agency, and they are
Sure.
for the drug manufacturers and the processed food people who are their donors, who make them one of the most profitable charities in the world. And there's now
Yep.
the American Diabetes Society, which is out to
Mhm.
do healing and is promising never to take these kinds of donations. And
Yep.
so, with guidelines, that healing the patient is the first step. And just to play onto that, have you heard yet? I can't remember if we talked about it already, about the metabolic revolution.
Mm-mm. Nope, I haven't heard of that one.
This happened right after we talked. I got kind of brought into this. So I hope you're going to join me if there's time
Mm.
with your planning.
Yeah.
I'm going to Washington, D.C. on Sunday, the 13th. And you can go to metabolicrevolution.org. And I've got a blog on this on my site. You can find it there as well. And
Mhm.
so people that you and I all know that are going to be there and on the stage speaking: Dr. Westman, Dr. Barry, Dr. Glant from Israel, but originally from here.
Yep.
Um, Chris Palmer, Georgia Edie, all of the people who are the movers and shakers in the low carb ketogenic world. And the metabolic revolution is just simply, we've had enough. We need to focus and change the nutritional guidelines. And to me, I'm like, the practice guidelines also. We need to follow more of the
Yes.
metabolic health professional guidelines, which are also in my blog.
Yeah.
Because I have one out there. And here's how you break a doctor's brain. Or if your doctor thinks what you're doing,
Yeah.
here's 17 hours of information to provide them so that they know that this is all. There are other guidelines, but the metabolic revolution, we're sick of taking it. Healing should, on every single thing, like what you were just talking about, on every
Mhm.
guideline, the very first thing should be, are you aware that this is reversible and you can heal? Would you like to go down that
Yes.
path, or do you want to be managed with leaky oil for the rest of your life and being
Yeah.
on these medications that have side effects, and just, age ungracefully, age with pain and agony, or do you want to be
Yeah.
95 and skipping down the street without a cane? Um,
Right.
and if we don't let people know that that's a possibility, so I'll shoot you the metabolic revolution
Yeah.
thing. There's
Yeah,
also
that'd be great.
there's an integrative mental health conference going on,
Good.
low carb conference going on there. A lot of these people are speaking at that as well. It's happening in
Yeah,
DC.
Dr. Eads.
That whole
Yeah.
3-day
Boy,
weekend.
her book. Yeah.
Absolutely. So a lot of those real rock stars that have millions of followers are going to be there.
Yeah.
I got roped in, and I'm kind of the person who created all this. Her name is Jess, and she's the founder of this, and she lives in Israel. And she's got a diabetes magazine called A Sweet Life, which is a virtual one. And she's a writer, and she's written over
Oh,
450 articles about diabetes and
wow.
all of this. And she's got a rare form of type 1 and manages it with low carb with all
Yep.
of this. And so I'm kind of I've been volunteering, and I'm doing, try to get the word out, and got a list of 200 influencers that were just now starting to hit the metabolic revolution. So I'll shoot you some stuff, and if you can share it on your
Yeah.
stuff as well. But it's about,
Yeah.
we're sick and tired of letting everybody be sick and tired. We're sick of doctors who have that attitude of what you were just describing right there, that the
Yeah.
patient doesn't come first, their checkbook comes first, and that's just
Yep.
so wrong. So anyhow, go
Yeah.
back with
Yeah.
other success stories you would
Yeah.
love to share.
Well, so the main one with the diabetic truck driver was just in April. His wife sent me a picture of his hemoglobin A1C, and he has been at 5.1 consistently. So his diagnosis of diabetes is gone. All the medications that he was taking diabetes wise, gone. No insulin, gone. She said, we have 8 because they have crappy Advantage Medicare plan, United Healthcare, and it doesn't cover anything. So he was spending up to $800 a month just in like insulin, all these things. And he's like, "What do I do with 800 extra dollars?" I said, "Buy a cow. I'd buy a cow. Fill your freezer."
Eat
So,
for the whole year.
he's yeah. And so I think it's really, it was life changing for him and life changing for his wife, because even though she had lost 100 pounds. She had had breast cancer and had gained back some during, going through that whole thing. And so, of course, I went into sugar feeds cancer, glutamate, all the things,
Press
Thomas
pulse.
Sieg, you know, yep, yep. So the Thomas Siegfried stuff, I really kind of had shared with her. And I'm like, everybody has gene mutations, everybody has these things. But I said, your genes are what loads the gun, and your lifestyle decides to pull the trigger. Yep. Yeah. So really, I've had good with that. I had another gal who was 96 years old. She's now, yeah, she's 98. Yep. Her last month was her birthday. So she's 98. The first time I walked in to see her, um, she had her little feet sticking out. She was sitting in a recliner chair in her house with a blanket on. Her son was sitting over next to her, and I could see about this much of her shins on both legs, just plaque psoriasis type. I mean, the worst I've ever seen physically. I mean, I've seen it in books, but I have never seen it to that level. And she's sitting there eating, and I looked down and I said, "You do know that the majority of the time that you have that it's a milk allergy?" And she's eating a yogurt, and she goes, "I figured." As she's eating it, and I said, "'Cause, those people are smart. They've lived that long, they know a lot of stuff." And she goes, "But I don't really like much other to eat, and I need the protein." And I'm like, "You need bacon and eggs and steak and hamburger and stuff in your life." So her son was all on board. He's actually a coroner, so he's, got some really good, yeah, biology background. So I was able to kind of back and forth, and he took notes. He had a legal pad, and I think he filled 3 or 4 pages of stuff, and we went through that, and we just started tweaking her diet. The other thing I did is I mixed up some castor oil. Um, I think I did castor oil, jojoba, and I don't think I did cayenne for her. I think that was for another lady. It might have just had those 2 ingredients, and had her rub that on those plaques. She had it on both legs and on the low part of her back. And I said, "Just try it and see." I said, "Try it in a small area and make sure you don't react to it, because some people can't do castor or jojoba and stuff." And she did fine. So they did that for several weeks, and then she got well enough that we discharged her. And then her nurse practitioner called me, which I had worked with her nurse practitioner when she was in school, in the emergency room. So she knew who I was, and I knew her. And she called and she says, "All right, what are you doing to her?" I said, "What do you mean?" I can play stupid. And she said, her plaques are gone. She goes, she doesn't even have that bright pink skin that you sometimes see underneath there once those plaques come off. She goes, if you didn't know she had plaques, they're gone. And I
Wow.
said, well, she's eating ketovore, and I'd say almost carnivore. I'm like, she's only doing bacon and eggs in the morning. She's doing butter. That's the only milk product she does is butter. She does milk or water. She does salts. She's doing the salts. I said, and then I did the castor oil and the jojoba. She goes, you were always into that natural stuff. And I was like, yeah, but I said, kind of work. And she goes, well, we had tried all these steroid, creams and stuff, and they just didn't work, or they'd short term and then they'd come back worse or not have much to change. And she said we really had ran out of all the medical options except for the infusions that they give you. So like your Humira, different things like that, that would shut down her immune system. And should you be doing that to a 96-year-old? You know, and he knew enough at that before I was even in there to be like, we're not doing that. We're not shutting down her immune system. We're not, you know, we need to find out what is causing it. And I said, well, most of the time a milk allergy, a food allergy, it's something that's consistently or that they're ingesting or around if they're constantly like this and it's turning their own immune system. I said her mast cells are on fleek. And she was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna look a lot of this stuff up," which is fine. And, so the next time I actually talked to her, I called her for a different patient. She said, "It's been over 2 years," and she says she has never made another plaque, and she said she's doing great. She's gained 15 pounds because she was underweight. Thank you.
Needed it.
Um, yeah, and she has some muscle mass that has come back. And so before they said she used to have home health with like therapy come in 2, 3 times a year to get her built back up, and then she didn't usually stay doing the home exercise program when somebody's not there telling you to do it. And so she would decline. Well, she's not doing that. We haven't seen her because she goes, "What? Will I see you again?" I said, "I hope not." I hope you don't, because then that means you've either had a fall, you're sick or something. But,
What
sometimes I
age
see
what
people
age
for
was she
joint
again?
replacements.
What
She
age
was
was she?
96. She
96
was
and putting
96.
on
Mhm.
lean muscle mass again, building
Yep.
strength just from what she's eating.
Yep.
Isn't that
Yep.
incredible?
Yeah. Yeah. And really the only, like you and I can do like push-ups and pull-ups and things like that. She can't do that. She can't do sprinting. She's past that, ability of doing that. To my belief. She might have, who knows? I think there are some people that probably could, but but just to see her, she showed me her bicep because I would always say, "Do you want a bicep?" And boy, she did that, and she had a little ball. It was so cute because she had like 2-pound weights that she was working out with, and then stretch bands,
Yeah.
and so that's what she was doing. But her gait, her walking ability was so good that she had been using a four-wheeled walker with a seat on it. She said probably since they came out, which has been what, 15, 20 years ago that they started with
More
the one with the seat. Yeah. And she doesn't have that. She uses the cane if they go long distance, like if they have to go throughout the hospital to do something. But otherwise, yeah. And so, Dr. Barry always says, if you can still fog a mirror, it's never too late. And that's what I tell all of my patients. And yeah, I've had several, and we're fortunate in this area. We have a lot of 90 plus age people. Um, and I think a lot of that is it's a farming community here, and it's not funny, but the husbands are all gone, but they were the ones out with the chemicals in the field. But the wives, they're all alive, and it's like they had their garden, they were out in their dirt, they were out in the sunlight, they were eating natural, they were raising their own animals to eat, their own chickens and stuff like that, and they all have high cholesterol. All these people that are in their 90s, and my oldest one's going to be 102 in November. Their cholesterol is off the chart. Their LDL is sky high. Their triglycerides are low. And everybody's like, "Oh, we got to get your cholesterol down." And I said, "For what?"
No, it's
Why?
longevity in the senior citizens. It shows longevity. You go to all of the whatever you want to call
Yep.
it, longevity stuff, and it
Sure.
correlates with healthy aging.
Absolutely. So when I had went back and saw my doctor when I was 20, that first blood work they had done, my triglycerides were 1,000. Now, they could have been much higher than that. That's all the higher the meter read back then. I just know the lady said we spun it once and it went to 1,000. She's like, I've never seen it do that. And so when he was sitting there talking to me before he gave me the script for Lipitor, he had said, and I go, well, what does that mean? I said, but I'm eating your fake butter, your country crock, your egg whites only in a carton, your chicken breast. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And he says, well, he says, it may not be anything you're doing. This is genetics. Okay. Which is what he told me. And I'm trying to think. Oh, he said, but you're going to be diabetic by next year. The triglycerides being that high, which it's the precursor, kind of tells you, hey, diabetes is on its way. Well, what a lot of people know about me, do you see any tattoos? Uh-uh. I despise needles coming at me. Now, I love to poke other people, and I'm really, really good at it because I don't want to hurt anybody. But like I can't, like a keto mojo, I'm like, I have to chase myself just to get my own. Yeah, you got one. Yep, and those are great. And so he says you'll probably be checking your blood sugar when you come back this in 9 months. He says you'll probably be having to check your blood sugar 4 times a day. And I'm thinking, I'm gonna pass out just thinking about it. And that's between that and him telling me I was gonna be, living out of that bottle. That's really what pushed me to go do that. When I came back at the 9 months and had lost 153 pounds, my triglycerides were 33
Oh my God.
in 9 months. Yes. And of course, this is before the cardiac calcium score test was out and stuff. But I had been keto at least 26 years when my doctor was like, "Oh, your cholesterol's high. Are you scared?" And I go, "No, I'm not." And she was like, "Okay." And of course, that's when the doctor quits standing and they sit down because they're like, shit, this is going to be a while. And I just said, I got a liver in my body that produces like up to 85% of the free floating cholesterol in my body. Was that put there accidentally? And she goes, no. And I said, so there's a purpose for me to have cholesterol in my body. And she was like, there is. And I said, like the myelin sheath is a double layer of phospholipid bilayer. So that's fat. And the membrane around the cells, that's fat. And I said, the brain is like up to 65% fat. She goes, yes. And I go, so why would I be afraid of it being high? Well, heart disease and stroke. And I said, time out, ma'am. Cardiac nurse. Like I was in the cardiac cath lab at that point working. And I'm like, that is not true. I said, that is a lie. And she was like, well, I said, no, no, no. I'm in there. I'm knee deep in this. And I said, that's not true. Cause I said the majority of the people that came in having MIs, having new onset AFib, whatever the thing was that brought them to us, their cholesterol most of the time was in the tank, and they had been taking that medicine, lowering lipid lowering stuff for 30, 40 years, and they're still on the table either getting a stent or going in for open heart. And I said, that isn't just cholesterol inside those arteries. I said, cholesterol is like a band-aid. It's a little swath that goes to that site. I said, but as those keep getting damaged, they become like osteocytes, which then attract all the minerals, which is plaque, like on your teeth. And I said, but you guys keep selling people that this plaque is all this cholesterol that they're eating. It's the animal fat. I said, but you can take butter and put it in this hand and margarine in this hand. Which one melts at body temperature? And she goes, well, the butter. And I said, then which one's going to have a hard time getting through my arteries? And she was like, well, would you just go do a cardiac score for me? And she just called it a cardiac CT.
Yeah.
And I'm like, fine. So I went the next day, and of course, working with radiologists all the time because of during a heart cath, you're doing a X-ray all the time, and so I knew these girls that were doing the CT, and I said, she goes, "Oh, are you ready for your cardiac calcium test?" And I said, "Wait a minute, what's this test called? And she goes, it's a CAC. And I said, so how come it's not a coronary artery cholesterol CT? If it's cholesterol we're worried about in these arteries. And she goes, well, it's calcium we're looking for. And I was like, suspicious. Kind of what I figured. And I said, okay, let's do it. So it was painless. It takes 10 minutes, cost me $75 out of pocket. Just cheap. I mean, I recommend anybody to get it, but you do, as far as I know, you have to have a doctor's order to do it. And I don't think own
Not
your
here.
own labs.
You can self-refer here. One of the the biggest
Okay.
health system in the state,
Oh,
which is now owned by Advocate out of Chicago, Aurora here.
oh,
It
nice.
was the last time I did it, a $50, and you can just call in and self-refer. And so I've had a couple of them that
Wow.
way recently, but go ahead with what you're saying.
Nice, nice. So had that done at like 6:45 in the morning, went to work, and around 7:30, one of the registration girls from the CT from radiology called, and she was like, "I'm so sorry to bother you right now." She goes, "But I think one of the girls transcribed your birthday wrong." And I'm like, "No, I'm in the computer. I work here. Obviously, my information's in the computer." I said, "No, it's April 71." And she goes, "Wow. Huh. Hmm." And I said, "What?" And she goes, "We have to send this on to the big radiologist in Springfield, Illinois, and then once he reads it, then we can send you the information on your result." I'm like, "Okay." So it was probably 1 in the afternoon. It was a few hours later, and this guy calls and he was like, "Is this Laura?" And I was like, "Yes, this is Laura." And he goes, "I'm so sorry. We have birthday transcribed wrong." And I'm like, here we go again. And I'm like, what? It wasn't like, can you give me your name and date of birth? It wasn't that. It was literally, they thought they had it wrong. And so I gave it to him and he says, oh. And I said, am I dying? Do I have like, an aneurysm? Is there something going on? Why is everybody being so quiet and nobody's telling me what the hell's going on? And he says, are you by a fax machine? And I said, I am. I have one right here. And he says, I'm going to fax that to you. And so when he faxed it to me, I don't think if I have it right here, he faxed it to me and he said, okay, I want you to read the first line. And I was like, okay. So the first line on my cardiac calcium score, the first one, the first time I had it done was 368. The second
And
time
what was the date of that 368 score?
it was 2017. So I
Okay.
had been keto for 26 years. So in 2019, I I had went back to the doc. Well, I have to go yearly for my insurance. And she was freaking out because I was up close to 300 for my total cholesterol. And I said, well, in 1980, I was normal. So that's fine by me. I said, just because you guys keep moving the thing down is not my issue. But so I had that cardiac calcium score done again. And when I had that one done, I was down to a 0. So the first uh, part of it, it says out of 174,000 people in the age range of 45 to 50, you could be compared to 0. And then underneath that, it says cardiac CT, coronary cardiac calcium CT, preventative health examination, comparison to anyone, none. And then it went down to list every single artery was 0. I had none in any of them, the Widowmaker, anything. Now, the first one, I was able to see it was my Widowmaker. It was the LAD. That was the one, and it had 300. So it was, and
So it
that's
was
not, I mean,
all
that's
just in one of
nobody,
the, all in the Widowmaker, none in the other three.
just a teeny bit in the I think it was the circumflex had a little bit to equal that 368. But even at that, I mean, I have people that have 2,500. So yes, I was just like, ooh, I don't like that. But I was like, okay. So then of course my office that I worked in was right across the hall from my doctor's office. So I ran over there because I was like, ha. And I said, what do you think about that? And she goes, well, she goes, family history. I said, no, my dad was dead at 42. and my grandparents all died before 62, and all my cousins died before they were 40 or at 40. Nobody made it to 41. And I said, "So, that's not family history. You can't use that one." And I said, "So me eating meat, fat, salt, water, and my arteries are clear, and I've healed all these things." Because I made her take depression, anxiety off of my diagnosis because I hadn't been medicated in over 2 years at that point. And she was like, "Okay, I guess we're just gonna go with that." And I'm like, "Can you say different?"
So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that everybody who just heard what happened here, because some of this is from what you were talking about a little earlier too, where you were keto
Mhm.
for a long time. And a lot of people in the keto world aren't going to think that I can have this issue. And with my personal story, while being
Yeah.
keto, but what I'll say clean keto, because you then talked about
Mhm.
how all these different products started coming out and kind of, and
Yes.
you got the reawakened the sugar taste and the
Oh,
sugar
yes. Oh,
addictions, and
yeah.
I'm a sugar addict too. And
Yeah.
my co-host
Yeah.
on my other podcast, Dr. Cooley, will raise his hand, say he's a sugar addict too.
Yeah.
And possibly that plaque stuff all could have been from that window of when you would call
Oh,
yourself
absolutely.
dirty keto, not clean
Absolutely.
keto.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
then
yeah.
you went to the, so because my website and the book I'm writing and all these different things that I go with the term metabolic therapy, and there's
Yes.
spectrum of what metabolic therapy is, and there's spectrum
Right.
of what is keto starts kind of for most people around 50 carbs a day. Medical
Mhm.
strength keto that Dr. Westman will talk about starts at 20 carbs a day, and I was at the 20 to 0 carb a day for the first
Right.
2, 3, and the whole time, and other than a couple little slips here and there that you pay dearly for when you make little slips. But
Absolutely.
so while being even just dirty keto, we'll call it, right? Is that how you
Yeah.
would describe it? You wound up picking up
Yeah.
a 330 some 360 score somewhere in there.
368.
And so,
368.
so intermediate, low risk is 0 to 100, like virtually no risk.
Right.
100 to 400
Yeah.
is considered intermediate risk. So that's where you're bumping up against coming into high risk. So that's why they're
Oh, yeah.
freaked out and nervous.
Yeah.
And then you just went to the cleanest form of nutritional ketosis that there is: meat, salt, and
Yeah.
water.
Yeah. And really,
And you cleared
um,
it all out.
yes. Yeah. And so no soft plaque,
In
no
three
hard
years, is
plaque.
that what it was? 3 years from going
No,
that
it
that
would have
that
been two
in
2 years.
2 years of what
Mhm.
is that's referred to as lion diet on the kind of the
Yes.
farthest extreme of between
Sure.
keto, ketovore,
Yes.
just like there's a spectrum of the vegan, vegetarian, and all this. There's
Sure.
another one on
Yep.
the other
Yep.
end. And
Yeah.
I just like to underscore that because for people that don't realize all of this and haven't paid a lot of attention to the heart disease stuff, and then just to play off on this. So, 2 books that are,
Yep.
because I had the heart disease situation going
Sure.
on too. And
Yep.
these go
Yep.
through and explain, and these are your tools that when you come up against, because the people that you were describing in the healthcare system, they're all taught a narrative. And there's a lot
Yes.
that's not taught. I've got a big blog on how do you break your doctor's brain. And I did another
Yeah.
episode on No Carb Life with Dave about just that. And
Yeah.
tell people, put this blog in the EMR and ask your doctor, I want to create a plan with you in 2 weeks or in 2 months when I'm coming in next.
Yeah.
Because they know the ones that give the pushback on, oh, and oh, you mean this actually, there's hundreds and thousands of
Mhm.
studies out here that show, but it's not what the narrative is taught, and it won't ever be taught until, that's why this whole metabolic revolution, because there are
Right.
doctors, but it's the patients, it's until the grassroots starts raising up and say, stop killing us. Stop
Yes.
making
Yeah.
us sick. Allow healing to be the first thing that we're going to talk about. And it's just the people who have
Mhm.
so much sugar addiction that, just like the person who can't kick the alcohol or can't kick the cigarettes, they're just so
Yep.
hooked that,
Yeah.
yeah. but everybody else can heal.
Yeah.
Let healing
Yeah.
happen.
And I educated my doctor, and she was very open. So she's vegan, although she's eating chicken eggs now. So I guess she's vegetarian, but she had been vegan forever. The last time I saw her, not this year, but the last August, she had just gotten healed up from a double wrist fracture again, her second time. The first time she was in a marathon, fell. I'm like, okay, if that kind of force, I can understand that. The second one was just she fell out of her chair sitting in her office and broke them both. And I was like, you need some protein and fat in your life. And I was like, and your hair's breaking off and your thyroid's sticking out. And she was like, and the funny thing is we ended up going over her lab work because my lab work was so spot on. I had vitamins, minerals, I had all of that ran. And my B, which I was anemic for years when I was younger, like all through school, um, and I mean even through pregnancy, at least my first one. I don't remember them mentioning that with my second one when I was 25. I had my first one at 20, my second at 25. But she says, "Oh my God, look at your vitamin B." She says, "I would kill to have that." I was over 2,000, which is kind of they want you right at that. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, yours is definitely not because you're trying to get your or your vitamins out of vegetables." And I said, "You can't break down the cellulose." And I said, "I see you walking around with," she has those baby carrots, cleaned in bleach, hanging out of her mouth all the time. And I said, "If you love carrots, eat the carrot." But I said, "You aren't converting beta carotene into vitamin A. I promise you, unless you got more than one stomach. And I don't think you do." And she goes, "I don't." But she says, "The poor animal." And I was like, "Gonna stop you there. I'm gonna pull a Ted Nugent on you." I was like, I live in a farming community. I know how many of those animals are killed in the fields every time the tractor goes through, the disc goes through the plat. I'm like, you annihilate lots of animals to make your vegetarian products. So no moral high horse with me on that one. And that was kind of the end of that. But the end of that doctor's visit, and she was in there right about an hour because I'm paying for an hour, so I'm gonna have the hour. So she always has it at 8 o'clock in the morning so she can stay on track. And at the end of that visit, and she kind of just said it in passing. She had already given me my little sheet. This is what you pay. And she goes, "Huh, we spent more time on my lab work than we did on yours. I probably shouldn't charge you for this visit." And I said, "Yeah, you probably shouldn't." He. And she walks out the door, and I'm like, "All right." So I go out and I write him a check, which they looked at me like, "What's a check?" And, that age group, and paid for my visit. And that's in August. It was the following December, not that December, the following year, December, I received a check from that hospital, which was the old hospital I used to work at. So I have no trust for them and any medical facility, most of them. And I'm like, why do I have this check? And it didn't say for like this date, didn't have anything on it really. So I called and they're like, well, I don't know. And I was like, I ain't cashing it. Like, I don't trust you guys. I don't. I said, "I'll cash it, you'll say I owe it back, I'll owe you interest." I'm like, "Just wipe it and no, I'm never gonna cash it." And then, she called me back later that day and she says, "Well, the doctor had already put in the order, or fixed her computer to charge you, but then went in later that day and wiped it, that it was not supposed
What
to,
was
it
a
was gonna be a
refund?
no charge."
Oh, thank God.
Yep. So,
Wow, you made a major impact on that,
yeah.
doctor.
Yeah, so I was pretty happy with that, and I just went down and saw her in August this year, and I walked in and she said, "I'm eating eggs." And I said, "I can tell." I said, "Do you notice your hair?" Because her hair looks so much better. I mean, she's a very smart, she has multiple medical degrees. I mean, just off the chart. And I'm big about bringing studies. So I brought the juniper study. I brought tons of studies to her over the last 2 years on especially the cholesterol stuff. And so she never didn't even, there was no comment. She may have charted that she talked about cholesterol, but it never came out of her mouth.
Yes.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the care, which
Even
I,
when they know they have to play the game.
yeah.
let me
Yeah,
circle back on
which
one
is
thing you
sad.
just that you
Yeah,
just said, because I might be able to give you, you might remember this from our previous conversation, but because I learned something new about the time I'm thinking that we spoke, and so I can give you props on this. But when you were also talking about the whole beta carotene and the carrot, and the fact that, because you and I both, the reason we go the way we go with what we eat, we're going for nutrient density first, and we're going for
yeah,
bioavailability, and so that the body can use it. And
yeah.
what did you are you the one, do you think, that told me that we store 5 years of B12 in the liver if you're properly topped off, which is why it can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years for somebody who's now no longer eating, if they go more the plant-based side of everything, that
Yeah.
things, and there are different, and we have storage mechanisms for all these different things.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so, but that's why, but they all kind of have a certain, you're now at the empty tank, and then everything starts
Right.
crashing. And because
Yeah.
they think they're getting all the nutrition that they're supposed to be eating, but they can't. And even with the anti-nutrients, so many things that they're eating in there don't allow other absorption of other things. So, oh, you can't absorb
Mm.
selenium if you eat beans,
Yep.
legumes. And it's just
Yep.
like, oh, but so I don't know if I remember learning it. I just couldn't remember exactly where I got
Yeah.
the 5 year liver
Yeah.
storage of B12.
I did not, I don't think we discussed it that time, but I do know that that is true. I have ran across that. The other thing that I tell people, because they're always like, what about your vitamin C? And so I go down, look at the molecule of vitamin C and carbohydrates. So they are very similarly shaped. So your cell has that receptor site. So it can either take vitamin C or it can take the carbohydrate. Like it's going to fit that same thing. So if you're taking in a bunch and you're flooding your body with carbohydrates, you have to have a lot more C thrown in the environment for you to get it because you're blocking so many of these receptors with the carbohydrate. When you're not doing that, you don't have to have as much of it because what you do take in, like you say, is so bioavailable. It goes where it's supposed to. It doesn't have to fight for any, competition and can get to the receptor and do what it's supposed to do. The other thing that I think, whether you're keto, any ketogenic lifestyle, where you're doing the mineralized salt is so important because of it unlocking, it opens that cell and allows you to get the fluid into the cell for the intercellular, fluid, so you're not peeing 74 times a day because it's just staying in your bloodstream instead of getting it. Yes, Soleil.
You taught me the Soleil, and I went off of
Yeah,
coffee a month over the last month, and I used to put 30 pink Himalayan salt
yep,
grinds into my 32-ounce
yep,
Yeti. And now I'm like, oh boy,
yeah,
I'm really down on my salt, because you can only put so much on your food. And I'm just
yeah,
like, and so I looked you up, and I went through the Soleil, and I've been making it. And
yep, yeah. And so I think that is another thing that helps. I think when you're feeding your body all the building blocks that it needs to create and heal, I mean, and you're quiet, you quiet the
it
body
doesn't.
down.
You allow it to.
Yes, and the thing is our body is allowed to heal. If you'd have told a doctor 20 years ago, that a part of your body can heal, they'd have called you retarded, like a lobe of the liver, that you can donate a lobe of your liver, and if you put that in me,
Throw it all
it
back.
will it will grow to fit me and yours will regrow to fit you exactly like it was. So they used to think that's not possible. Well, and now we know better. My mother is an example of somebody who ate very healthy, very low carb growing up, and she had me in 71. She had an IUD back in the 70s called the Dalkin Shield, which had the major lawsuits because of the copper and stuff. And she had had scarring of her fallopian tubes. So she had her tubes tied, cut. The one side was completely removed. They're like, you'll never have kids after this, so I was it. And but she ate healthy all that time. And my senior year, 1989, I had a brother born to a mother who was almost 42 and a stepdad 42. And I can remember when we went up to the doctor's when she was in labor, He was so mad because he's like, "I know you had a tubal reversal." And she's like, "Yeah, at 41, I'm gonna go have my tubes reversed." And she says, "I only have one." And she goes, "It was so scarred that they did like a dye test and nothing would even get through, like they do for IVF." Because her second husband did want to have children and they tried and they're like, "There's just nothing there. It's fried." But over time, and so when he went in, she had my brother naturally, and then he went in to tie the tube again. And of course, he's giving her grief, like, "You've had something done, blah, blah, blah." And you could tell you've either had that surgery, and she had no surgeries, belly button, anybody, anywhere. And so he gets in there, and doctors don't like to admit when they're wrong. Not all doctors, but a lot of them.
Most
And
of
he
them.
came into the post-op room, waiting room, and he showed us, this picture that they had taken, and he said, "That's the new tube." And so, basically, the fallopian tube would be similar to the size of un or cooked spaghetti, a cooked spaghetti noodle. She had that was still there. You could see the clump on the end where they had, like, burned the ends, and she had the clamp on it still, but around it, just
It
like a
made its own
bypass.
bypass. It made its own bypass, just like a heart
And
bypass surgery without
and just
grabbing
like we make
another. It just
collaterals.
grew it.
Yes, but we do that anyway. So if you look at a diseased heart or an athletic heart or an asthmatic person's heart, when you look at it, they have arteries that sit like this. And I call those the four-lane highways, the main branches. Well, as you get older, you'll make collaterals, which I call two-lane highways, which will go around. If you had any areas of injury or something happen, it'll do that to get the blood around. So like jump ring, like electricity. So we do that already. And I knew that 15, 20 years ago, just being in the medical field, seeing that when we would do the scan. And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool that we can do that." And that's why at the time, before the other reasons that 24-year-olds were dropping dead on the football field, prior to that, um, that's why those kids didn't do so well. The cardiac arrest, if they did have it, which was used to be fairly infrequent, but if they did, you couldn't bring them back. They didn't have those collaterals, so if something was down, didn't matter. You could do CPR all you wanted. If you couldn't get them and get it opened up quick enough, then they weren't gonna make it. Um, so, yeah, the body's amazing if you just and I also say so many people are on so many medications, and the medication is never to cure you. It is to disease manage you, and when they say disease management, it's not even knocking the disease itself down, it's knocking the symptom down that your body naturally is telling you something's not right. Your high blood pressure, and this drives me insane. I'll walk in a home and they'll have, like, 4 or 5 bottles of high blood pressure medicine. I had one. I had a 97-year-old. I walked in, she's on 3 blood pressure medicines and Midodrine to elevate your blood pressure. And I said, "Do you take all of these together at the same time?" And the family's like, "Yeah, that's how they're prescribed. So you're taking 3 anti-hypertension medicine, and you're taking one for hypotension." Does that make sense?
Oh my
So
God.
that was a phone call. Yeah, that was a phone call to the doctor that day from her kitchen table because I'm like, "Oh, hell no, something's gonna get changed. We're gonna fix that." But I always ask people, I'm like, "What is the root cause? What's causing your high blood pressure?" I'm like, "Do you have, kidney trouble that you're not filtering and it's allowing everything to back up? Do you have pulmonary hypertension? Do you have some clogged arteries? Do you have something going on? Do you have, filter issues? What is causing the high blood pressure? Because we're not fixing the high blood pressure per se. We're relaxing your blood vessels, which is not something you want to have all the time, especially in these elderly who are also on a blood thinner. And then all it takes is a fall. And guess what? You're going to bleed out, you know? So I really, that's probably the main thing I work on is just trying to educate the families and be like, ask these questions when you go to the doctor. Ask, what is this helping? Is this curing something? Is this doing that? Because I said, otherwise, you know, why go to the doctor? If every time you go, all they do is give you 4 or 5 medications. And I'm like, how many times has the doctor touched you in the last so many visits. Now, this time, my doctor did a head to toe. Like, she listened to my lungs, she did the whole 9 yards, because the year previous, she didn't lay a finger on me because we were discussing her labs. But in her note, I went in to see my after visit summary on the portal, and it was like auscultated lungs, clear to auscultation, no murmurs, gallops, and rubs on the heart. And I'm like, how the hell you know that? You didn't even do that. So I called down there and I said, she's got to make an amendment to my note. And they're like, well, she's not going to. I said, oh, she's going to. I said, she didn't pull out a stethoscope. She did not touch me. We discussed her lab work. And they're like, well, and I said, you just let her know I've called and that I want my after visit summary to be accurate. And so I think it was a week or so, and I went in and it was accurate because that wasn't true. But just think about it, if you go to the doctor, they have one of these computers sitting in front of them and it's type, type, type away. Here's the symptoms. And then it spits out what's your diagnosis. And then here's the pills or drugs or whatever to try to fix the problem, which is really just quieting down your symptom, which even with pain's a symptom. It's of something. So figure out what is causing the pain. But we have a whole, you can't even imagine, although you were in the medical field, like working with medical. So the number of people that are on chronic pain medication would blow your mind. Lyrica, gabapentins, methylcarbamols, yeah, it's just through the roof.
I have a client, she's 70 years old, and you found me because I was on no carb life, and I've been there three
Yeah.
times. And last night, sitting right here in this chair, a client that I've had since mid-May, and she's 70 years old, 20 years of rheumatoid arthritic pain.
Oh,
Every
yeah.
morning she has to try to used to have to convince herself to get out of bed and that it's worth still going on today because that's how bad it was. She carried in here 5 canes because she used to walk with canes when I found her, and she'd always be kind of stooped over and everything. And we've been working, and within 5-6 weeks, she started becoming fat adapted and then got into ketosis. And suddenly, because we meet once a week and talk all the time, but meet face to face once a week. And we usually just kind of meet in the car. One of us will drive up to the other one, get in the other person's car, and we sit and talk or go to a coffee shop or whatever. And she's just like, she goes, here, look at this. And this is like week number 5. And she's like, she gets out of her car and she walks around to the sidewalk and she's just kind of like, smiling, twinkle in her eye. And I'm just like, and she got it. And I can say her name because she's given carte blanche because she's so thrilled she's off 4 different meds right now. She's off of a GLP-1. She's off of a thyroid. She's off of an SSRI. All of her brain fog is now gone. But, we brought our canes in because she wanted to show, I'm not using these anymore. I walk effortlessly now, and now we're trying to build strength again. And so we're working beyond just the diet nutrition stuff. We're working on build the strength. So instead of going from like a frail 60-year-old, go to be, by the time you're 80, you're going to be doing push-ups and all, and be in the gym and looking like a fit grandma. And what's going on with her is just mind-numbing and how fast it was. So all these people who are on pain meds, again, if the conversation's had by the doctor, and if the guidelines say, first, do you want to choose path A? We can heal you, and you can do this with food. And just to quick add in, because it was touched on, but there is vitamin C if you eat fresh meat. It's just not a ton, but there's more than enough to do everything that you need. So it's in there. The USDA in 1920 said there wasn't enough to put it on the list, but it's in there. But so plan A, do you want to heal? Well, here's the criteria to heal. Plan B, you got a leaky oil pipe and you're going to keep adding the meds and be miserable. And again, that's why the metabolic revolution is just so critical, that we build the groundswell to make this all happen.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I'm just sitting here going, you work in an incredible target-rich environment for you to go in and do so much for so many people.
Yep.
You must be like an angel that walks in and
I
helps.
love it. I love it because and that's the part that I always liked about nursing. So, nothing to take away from hospice or hospice nurses, but that's not me. And I'm glad they're there, and I've known some that are wonderful, and I know when it's time to tell a patient it's time for hospice. I can have that talk, but I can't go into my work every day knowing that 90% of those people are not going to be here in 3 months. That's not how my psyche works. I want to, and I know you can't fix everything and everybody too, but I want to at least give you the right things to do it and see where you can go. And some people, I have one lady that's doing keto, and she has healed so many things already, and she's doing the clean keto. So I have a garden because, spoiler alert, my husband eats the standard American diet, although I call him a caveman. So he eats with the seasons. So garden time, he eats gardens, berries, things like that, deer. Winter, fall, it's deer, more stuff like that. He does eat a lot more meat, fat than he ever did, since I started. Because I'm like, I'll make the main port, I'll make the meat. If you want sides, you can make them. I mean, I'll make them, but I can't taste it. I'm not going to taste it. So I'm like, I don't know if this is good. So, it's just easier for him to be like, I'll just make my own. But at least the food that some of these people are doing is more like the keto I did. It's what they grow coming from somebody they know, or they know the right ways of at least trying to clean it as best as possible, to get the stuff off of it. Um, but it's so funny. I will talk with farmers, and I had one, we were talking about fishing worms, and I said, well, yeah, we don't have any trouble getting fishing worms. We go out to the garden and take a scoop shovel and, go a row in and turn the dirt over, and we've got plenty. And, we got those little black things that curl up on themselves. I'm not sure what they're called. They're an odd little looking beetle thing that turn in on themselves. But anyway,
Yeah,
they're like
yeah.
roly polies. Yeah. And so we have tons of those. Well, I looked that up years ago, and that's very healthy dirt that has the different things that we had. Plus our garden grows really good stuff for these people. So, but anyway, I was telling him, I said, we just do that. And he goes, I don't know if I can do that. And I said, well, you couldn't do it out there in your field. And he looked at me and I said, that shit's dead. I said, your ground is dead. And he goes, well, it's not dead. Look at all that corn. I said, that corn is nothing more than paper. You sit there and chew the paper. Yeah, you're going to get full, but it's not doing anything for you.
Or
I
nutrients.
can bring you something. Yeah. I said, I can bring you something that'll show you in the 60s what an ear of corn contained when it comes to vitamins and minerals compared to what it did in 2021, which I did. And he goes, well, we have to feed the world. I said, I'm not going with that one either because half of the world won't take our food products because they're genetically modified and glyphosate coated. And he was like, well, the glyphosate isn't going to get into your food. And I said, wait, you're spraying it on there. Some of the seeds come with it already
In
embedded in
there.
the seed. Yeah. And I said, so you're telling me none of that gets into the plant and then you send it to the clean green factories that are putting out the black smoke into the air to process these things down, then how are these little kids having glyphosate? How did they get it in their bloodstreams that don't live in farming communities? They live in the middle of Chicago, New York, St. Louis, haven't seen a farm. How's glyphosate in their body then to the levels it is? I mean, it's high levels. And he was like, well, I I don't know. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's coming from your farm, you know? And that's like, you just have to, you have to try to meet people where they are, but there are
Yes,
times
you have to
where
start there, but you have to educate. You have to
yeah,
educate.
yeah, yeah, and I feel like so many people it was weird. My grandmother's generation, was born in I think she was 21. She was born in year 21. They the doctor was God, God, but they didn't take pills. That generation didn't take pills either. But their doctor was God, and they wouldn't even tell him if they had a pain because they would expect that he should just know because he's God. So they were that way. Then the next generation is like, we don't really like the doctor. but he gets rid of our pain and gives us all this medicine. And then that generation is like pills, pills, pills. You can walk in a home of a 70-year-old right now, and it's not anything. Like, I'm more surprised, like, I'm always, like, jumping for joy if I see only 3 or 4 bottles of medicine, because most of the time, it'll be their whole counter or a huge section of their dining room table is just covered, and I'm like, "Are these all current meds, or are some of these old that you just didn't throw away?" No, those are current meds, and I'm like, "How can anybody think that putting all of those down inside your little stomach with your hydrochloric acid, your pepsin, everything, how is that not a chemical concoction that's probably not great?" When you think about your body and your body's trying to break that stuff down and you're feeding it junk, so you got inflammation, so everything's not working through the system. I'm like, "How do you?" And they're like, "Well, the doctor says I have to." And I'm like, "The doctor makes a recommendation."
Keep
So,
talking. I got to look something up because I want to
yeah.
quote it exactly, but keep going.
Yeah. So I always tell them, your doctor makes a recommendation. This is what I think you should take. This is what I think you need. You are the owner of your body, and you get to make that decision whether you want to go ahead and do that or if you do not. And they're like, "Oh, I can?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Really?" It just seems odd to me that they just think that is so far-fetched that they have the right to say no. And I said, "In the hospital setting, when I was a floor nurse, if I walked in to give you potassium and lisinopril and a furosemide for a water pill, I would always tell you exactly what the meds were, what they were supposed to do for you. And I would say, "Do you want to take them?" And they'd look at me and I'm like, "You do have the right to refuse." Because you do. You have the right to refuse a med, a treatment, a test, any of that. You have the right to sign yourself out of the hospital, if you are not in agreement. But I tell people that doesn't translate into you're always right and the doctor's always wrong either, or they have to always agree with you. You can agree to not agree, which is what me and my doctor do. We're not gonna agree on the cholesterol. So, yeah. What's that say?
So, well, so I have a goal of like turning out 50 blog posts onto my website in the next month. And it's all just because I wrote the 65-page guide over the first 2-3 years of my 6-year journey. And it's turning into a book, but it is just rife with like 30-40 different really topics inside of it that all are individual blogs. And so this morning I was playing with Chat GPT
Oh, yeah.
because, and that's a trip, and we can talk offline about
Yeah.
all the ways that this is a trip. But there's something I said on somebody else's podcast. No, somebody who's going to come on my podcast Saturday. Another person who reversed their MS with carnivore, and
Yes.
I had Emily Penton on this morning, which
Yeah.
is now out live as
Yeah.
of now, who did that and reversed her bipolar. But when I was
Yeah.
talking to Colleen, who's coming on Sunday, and I go, "Well, do you understand what the number, just to tell the story?" I said, "Well, I wake up and go to bed. I go to bed feeling great. I wake up in the morning feeling great because I know I'm making a lot of good things happen in people's lives." And,
Right.
sometimes people will pull "well, you're not a doctor." And I go, "I know, but I'm doing all these things that doctors don't know how to do because they're strapped with limited education in med school on, not limited. They were throwing a ton of crap on them. A lot of
Yeah.
dots were not connected, and a lot of research that's been available for 20, 30, 40,
Yeah.
50 years is not being provided because it will then wipe
Mhm.
everything out if they come out actually fixing people and creating
Yes.
health instead of creating disease management." I came out of the disease management world. So I said to her, so I go, when people just throw credentials at me, I go, "I'm a health coach. I'm going to
Yeah.
show you how to become healthy, and I'm going to
Yep.
only do it with real food. And I'm going to
Yep.
make you aware that you might become immediately over medicated because once your hormonal system and your body starts
Yes.
functioning the way it's supposed to, we need to
Yep.
have you taking blood pressure, and we're going to do the keto mojo and do the glucose
Yep.
because I don't want you going hypotensive or hypoglycemic and passing out behind the
Right.
wheel if you're driving or falling down the stairs
Yes.
because suddenly you're over medicated because the body's already healing and fixing everything within
Yes.
days." So that's my only fear, not fear, but that's where danger comes in, that By making you healthy, you're immediately overprescribed. Now, when I
Yes,
was talking with Colleen, and I'm just like, well, do you know what the number 3 cause of death in America is?
I
And
do.
I know so, but I pulled it up, and Chat GPT will back me up on this. Go ahead and say it.
Mm-hmm. It's medical interventions.
Yes,
Yep.
it's okay. So there's a bunch of different things that will go into this
Mhm.
category, but in the summary paragraph or two, medical errors in total. Medical errors collectively rank high among leading causes of death in the US, with estimates suggesting they could be the third leading cause of death behind heart and cancer. This is due to combined effects of misdiagnosis, drug to drug interactions, surgical errors, and system failures. So I go, you
Yes.
know, I have huge respect for and I say
Yep.
this in my one blog where, here, share this with your doctor. And
Yes.
and I have a lot of friends who are doctors, and I co-host with a cardiologist
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
another podcast. And
Right.
I didn't have the brains or the will and the desire and the work ethic and to do what they were able to do. And they became great, incredible test takers, but they're
Yeah.
incredibly authoritative following. And they don't teach
Yeah.
heavy duty critical thinking skills because it's all about here's what it is. Don't ask questions, pass the test, follow the guidelines, pay attention to your
Correct.
computer, don't talk to your patient. And I know that's an overstatement, that last one, that was for
Right.
drama. But I'm just like, yes, I don't have those credentials, but I do what they can't. And I'm not contributing to the number 3 cause of death in America.
That's true. Yeah, I've had people say that, and I'm always like, well, just think about this for a minute. When you think about going to your doctor, I have nothing to gain other than you getting healthy. I don't. What, you're gonna pay $50 to work with me one time, and you're gonna get enough information to go out and do your own from then on. And there's a lot of people that I do for free completely because of their need, and I want to help as many people as possible. But I'm like, but when you go to the doctor, they're paid. And I'm like, they're handcuffed when they work for these bigger facilities, unless they're out on their own, have their own negligence, insurance. They have to follow that standard of care, and it's corrupt. And I'm like, think about, I always tell them, especially the older, I'm like, think about when you were 15, 16 and you went and saw the little country doctor. I said, for one, he knew you. He knew everything about you. He could ask you about your uncle and his dog. They just knew everything about you and they cared. They had ownership with you. You weren't just a number. You were a human. And that's where a lot of this woke stuff is it's destroy individualism and it's more about the total. So,
So like,
and I think a lot of the medical schools went that way. But I said, remember your doctor would be like, oh yeah, you have this boil. This didn't work, the medicine, but, Jim is a colleague of mine. He did this with a patient and it's off label. It's not really a medicine, but you could try this. Do you want to try it? Well, back then you could do it. Now they'll get fired. They can't even mention it. Now, I do know of one physician, which I will never name. They would have to put a bullet in my head, and I still wouldn't say it, that does work for a facility close enough to me in Illinois that has to follow the standard of care. So I sent patients to him because I heard he was a little bit normal. And so he'll have a little pad of paper that he has sitting on his little computer, and he'll be like, oh, your cholesterol is high. So we're going to discuss cholesterol medicine. Do you feel like you need to take cholesterol medicine? And he'll shake his head no while he's discussing it. And they're like, and then he'll be like, no, he'll write it on there, but he has to play the game of put it in the computer that this was taught,
it's not only that. I have a nephew who's
Yeah.
brilliant and is
Yeah.
a engineer at one of the huge EMR companies in this country.
Mhm.
And I was talking with him last year Christmas, and they have microphones in all these doctors' offices now so that they don't have to do all of this.
Yeah.
So so so,
Dragon.
so it's being dictated into the EMR. So, but I don't think there's video yet reading this. So
Yeah.
the head shake. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's terrifying from an authoritative standpoint. Just how
Yes. Yep.
wow. Well,
Draconian.
Laura,
It's
we've been on
draconian.
an hour and 39, and this is just getting into like our first 3 hour phone call we had because we could talk forever. And guys, was I not absolutely correct that this woman knows everything? And oh
I
my
don't know
God,
everything.
well, we're both lifelong learners and we both have that thing to keep
Yes.
learning. And we
Yes.
know a lot. And I still will tell people I know so little. I just want to keep learning. My whole thing is
Yep.
I need to keep learning.
Yeah.
And yeah, just the 1,500 hours in the last 2 years, I've gone down the rabbit hole on circadian and quantum biology and health and what all that means and why that's applicable.
Yep. Yeah.
Books on the
Yeah.
electric, the body electric and the invisible rainbow right down there, all on those topics. Anyhow,
I
um,
grounded this morning.
me too. And people are coming out of my
Yep.
building and seeing me. I go, come on over here. It's just get the sun in your
Yep.
eyes.
Take your shoes off. Get in the
But,
grass.
I know Fridays are your days off and I don't want to take up the whole rest of your day and everything. Is there any other last tidbit you'd like to throw out to everybody? Because I
I
would love to have you back and we can
Yeah.
go into other stories
Yeah.
and topics down the road.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is I think so many people get to a place where they feel like they're hopeless, that everything has to come from a pill bottle. Their happiness, their stomach feeling better, their constipation, their headaches, their hypertension, whatever the ism is, and that there is a way for you to move forward and get out of the matrix. If any of you, I never watched the Matrix. I just hear what the Matrix is about. I don't want to watch it. My husband's like, "You're already militant enough. We don't need any more." So I'm not allowed to watch it. And so it's just that just think common sense wise. Just look back to what do you feed a baby? You feed them their ancestral stuff they're supposed to have if you're able to nurse. And no, nothing against people who can't, don't, whatever, but that is the right thing. So if you can put the right stuff in your body, single ingredient foods, if nothing else, if you can just get down to as close to single ingredient foods, I always tell people, we have survived all these years and nobody has been able to prove to me that food that was made by God and put on earth is going to kill me compared to food made by human. I want to see the proof because we do have the proof of evolution. Great, great, great. Last 150 years went to crap. I don't know how much more evidence there needs to be. You can see it. Um, and so I would just say that if you're miserable, you're having pain, any of the issues you have. I also had an MS patient who I think she's down to two plaques, and I think she was over 42 to begin with. So, and that was a patient I had in a pain management clinic I worked at 5 years ago. But so those things can be reversed. Your body can heal, just get with people, like go out and search these things. And even though my stuff says carnivore, I've worked with vegans, vegetarians, ketovore, carnivore, doesn't matter. um Fruitarian, I had a fruitarian and diabetic fruitarian. But you can help yourself by what you put in. Everything you eat is your fuel. And I think if people would quit looking at their food as it's got to be pretty and flashy and do all these things, as to if this is fuel. Literally, I look at it as I do a gas can when you're pouring it in your mower. That's the fuel that needs to go in there. So the less work your body has to do to break down these nutrients and get them to the places they have, the better running machine you're going to have. So I think if anybody is having issues, that's what I would do is just start going and looking up a lot of these doctors that we've talked about, people like myself, yourself, any of these, just go out there and go down those holes, see what they have to offer. And you may not fit with me, you may not fit with him, but maybe there's somebody out there, like the gals that I'm on with Meaty Mondays, they're African American. The reason they both started a YouTube channel after being carnivore was because they didn't see anybody else that looked like them. So they were like, we want to go out there and be a voice so that other people can come and be like, oh yeah, I can identify. So I
Yep.
would just say find your tribe. And it doesn't mean everybody has to agree because I'm okay. I can debate with anybody. But just go out there and take ownership in your health, because it really is supposed to be up to you what your health is, not everybody else's. So that would be my last bit of advice.
And share the name of this group you have is it Monday nights that you do? What do you call yourself?
So every Monday it's called Meaty Mondays, and we're called the Fierce Felines. And I do have my lion.
And I had to laugh because when you were saying go find your tribe, and my group of people were called the Metabolic Life Warriors, and
Oh, there
and
you
so we
go.
got a WhatsApp and we share meals and memes and
Sure.
inspiration and what
Yeah.
they learn, and they teach each other, and it's awesome stuff. But yeah, so I'm going to end on two things. One, I'm just going to say, because I've written it before, and I'm just like, it's in a blog and my website. We're the only species on the planet smart enough to re-engineer our food and dumb enough to eat it. And guys, didn't I tell you how brilliant Laura is at the beginning? Because we're going to have her come back and go through more topics through time, because she's just a walking encyclopedia of information. And she's been paying attention to this for coming up on 30 years now. Right?
28 years keto, over 5 years carnivore,
Over,
so 33
over,
years. Yeah.
over. So I can't
Yeah.
thank you enough for coming on, Laura. And let's stay in contact and talk again soon. Hold for just 1 second while I stop recording.
All right. See ya.